Thanks for joining the meetup online or in person. As Matt was saying, the last one was a couple months ago, end of November. So since then we didn't have one in December, but then this is obviously the January one. And there was in that time, obviously the holiday and New Year, and managed to get out a release just before the end of the year, which was the plan. So this is 1.22.0. Numbers are getting quite high. Sometimes it's hard to remember what you're up to. So 1.22.0, the main headline of this is in the title here, SSL support in async.io. So that means you can create a server that allows SSL connections, incoming connections, and you can also do it on the client side. So you can open a connection and talk to a remote server using SSL from async.io. So, I mean, a lot of the pieces were already there, but this just needed to be all connected up properly. Obviously, async.io has supported client and server for a long, long time, ever since its beginning, but in MicroPython that is. And MicroPython's also supported SSL for quite a long time, before even async.io was widely used. But async.io SSL combined is quite a tricky thing because you have to do non-blocking SSL sockets, which is not easy. I think I might have rambled on a bit about this in a previous meetup, but MicroPython does things a bit different to CPython in that respect. It doesn't use these SSL want read, want write exceptions in the on an SSL socket, but rather you can just take an SSL socket and you can poll it for reading and poll it for writing. And the thing is, if you poll an SSL socket for reading, that means, tell me when the socket has some data to read. Underlying that, you may actually have to do quite a few writes before you can do a read. Now, if you have just a normal socket or a UART or anything, if you poll it for reading and it's got a byte ready for reading, you can read that byte as the user at the application level. But an SSL socket, because there's a lot of handshaking in particular, back and forth between the client and the server, the two sides of the connection, to be able to read a byte of data at the application level, that is, you may have to transfer bytes back and forth in encrypted or handshake bytes over the actual socket. And so when an SSL socket is ready for reading, that doesn't necessarily translate to the underlying non-secure socket being ready for reading. It could mean wait for the underlying socket to be ready for writing. And so that complexity is handled in CPython with SSL want read and want write exceptions. But in MicroPython, because we have full control over basically the operating system, as it were, and our ability to re-implement poll on sockets, on any object really, we can make it so that if you poll on a socket for reading, it just waits until that's ready for reading, but underlying it can, do the reading and writing back and forth. So once that was all plumbed through actually release or two ago, but then actually making async.io work properly with that's what's done in this latest release. So async.io, you can now just pass an SSL parameter. You can just say when you start a server open connection, you can just exactly the same as how you do it in CPython. And to open connection, you can just open it to a HTTPS, and it all just works. As part of this, we needed new methods on an SSL context to be able to load certificates, and also doing certificate date time validation is now enabled. So that means if you're doing SSL, you need to have your time on your board, your RTC most likely set correctly. Otherwise, the certificates will look like they expired, 20 years ago or 20 years in the future or something. So be careful with that. that's setting the RTC is important, and you can actually do that with MP remote. You just do MP remote RTC space dash dash set, and it will do it for you, setting it from your computer's time. So that's the main thing that was done in this release. And there are, as usual, lots of other things that went into the release. It was, quite a few months, or 2 or 3 months, I think, of work. Lots of commits again, lots of people contributing, which is really great to see. And there were lots of other various things that went into it. Sorted queue string pools were one of them by Jim, to and following up from other PRs that were intending to do a similar thing to improve performance of queue strings, internal string representation, intern strings, so that the frozen strings are now sorted, which means it makes it faster to find. So what this means for you when you're using it, I'll just scroll down a bit to there's some performance. Oh, no, there was no performance there. There was just a paragraph about the performance. That when you're doing an operation that is heavy on strings, which is usually something like importing, because when you import something, there's a lot of strings in the file. If it's a .py file, then there are many, many strings. Everything's a string because it's a text file, and those strings have to be looked up in the the internal pool of available intern strings. If they exist, they need to be added. But to look them up now is much faster because it's looking it up in a sorted list. So importing a PY file or even an MPY file is also faster. It can be up to 200% improvement, which means 3 times as fast. And other things like string operations, some of them are also faster because of searching it for a string is much quicker, an intern string. So that is great. Some good performance improvement there. And that didn't impact anything else. So that was a good, let's improve this performance of that part. The other thing that's in the headline here is common machine module bindings. As a user, you probably won't notice this so much, but if you're developing MicroPython or making a new port, the idea here is to make common all of the modules like machine and time and everything and OS, so that the ports don't have to re-implement them at all. So in some cases, like for the time module, it's just that one flag you have to enable, and then the time module is there as long as you provided the ability to get the time and so on in the port. Then you've got all the functions in it.
You there, Damien?
As every other port, and now has a similar property that ADC, all of these classes. Hello?
Hello. It's,
Can you hear me?
you can. It's just got you just kind of dropped out a little bit there.
I stopped my video. Can you still see my screen?
Yes.
You can still hear me, I guess?
Yep. Try that.
Okay, I will continue. Just please tell me if you can't hear me. So I was saying that the classes in the machine module, like SPI, I2C, UART, PWM, ADC, and also the functions like deep sleep, light sleep, idle, and so on, they don't have to be repeated in each port over and over again. So this it helps to make new ports because you don't have to write as much code. And so,
Damien, you're dropping out again.
so there's lots of other things in here you can read about. One thing to note, I guess, the TNC port has been removed because it was almost completely unmaintained and had very, very limited features. but yeah, I don't think anyone would really notice that because it wasn't really being used at all. Little FS was updated. If you use little FS, then it's all backwards compatible, but once you've updated, it will update the file system, and then you can't downgrade to a previous version without reformatting the file system. So just be aware of that. MP remote mount should be faster now by many, an order of magnitude because of improvement that was done there with buffering. And then on the RP2 port, there's a new DMA class for direct control over DMA transfers. That's still a little bit work in progress. I mean, it's all there and working. The docs, I don't think the docs have been merged yet, but maybe they have. But yeah, there are examples there as well for that. Yeah, so you can again read these notes to see what's changed. ESP32 switched to a more recent IDF version, and that will probably be switched to a more recent one again in the next release. So that had quite a big increase in code size. And I think embed TLS was responsible for some other increases there, or little FS update, sorry. Also in the notes this time, I put the time zones that contributions were made from. I thought that might be interesting to see. So all of the commits that were made, this just makes a list of the different time zones that they were made in. You can probably guess which countries and places it's from: America, Europe, and Australia. Well, it's still good to see. So, but one thing I wanted to talk about though was this release had quite a few bugs in the RP2 port, and a patch release was made a few weeks later. You can have a look here, which fixed some stuff in the RP2 port. Now, there's actually still some more bugs in RP2 to do with DMA, which will need another patch release. But I just highlight the reason for this. I mean, I think it's interesting how this came about. So when I do releases, a lot of things are tested on hardware, including a Pico and a Pico W, and the full test suite is run with network tests and machine module tests and things. And this time, this bug got through, and the reason bugs got through for the RP2 port was because, first of all, there weren't enough tests. And secondly, the tests that I did run, some of them failed, but I did not take notice of those failures. And that sounds like it's totally my fault, and I guess it is. But the reason I did not take as much notice of these tests that failed on the Pico and the Pico W was because I knew that there was a bug in the Pico SDK with alarm pools and scheduling of timers, and sometimes a timer would be missed, and the bugs seemed like they were the failures of the tests seemed to be related to this bug, so I conveniently ignored them, thinking that, well, it's this edge case in the Pico SDK that I keep seeing, and so I didn't. There was a few tests that I just were like, okay, I know these network tests on the Pico W are probably going to fail, and they did. The threading tests we didn't run automatically on the RP2, which was another problem because it would have picked up this bug. And then there was another test that also may have picked up the problem, but it didn't run on a Pico normal, but it did run on a Pico W. But again, I didn't take notice of it because this test I wrote specifically for Unix with threading, and the fact that it didn't work on RP2 with threading was kind of not surprising because it relied on garbage collection and interrupting the garbage collector with an E interrupt, and it was a very obscure test. But had I taken proper notice of that one and followed it up, I would have seen the bug. So there were lots of things that were sort of pointing to the fact that there was a problem. And it's all really to do with testing. And I think this just highlights the importance of testing and the importance of taking note of failures, even if it's a small, obscure failure, it's really important to track down the source of the failure. And if you don't, well, if you do that, it's either a failure because you just can't run that test on this target, for example, or it's a real failure of the firmware and you need to fix it. So even though I try and have quite strict testing for the releases, there's a lot of hardware targets, and this just shows that being very strict with tests is important. And I think, this was sort of like one of those things where there were just too many, there were multiple things that went wrong to lead to this problem. Had we had hardware in the loop testing, this would have been caught long ago. Had I made sure that all the tests always ran on the Pico and the Pico W, this would have been caught. Had we had threading tests that will automatically run on Pico and Pico W, this would have been caught. So I've tried to address those problems already in follow-up commits. Sorry, they weren't in this patch release, but I've added tests since on master, so that there are more threading tests and there are DMA tests and more I2S tests. And so if you run the test suite at the moment, it does pick up another few problems which need to be addressed, which is to do with DMA. But the one that you see on the screen with the atomic mutex, that was a serious problem with when you used the thread. So that was fixed as quick as I could. So yeah, I think it's an interesting story of testing. So let's hope that doesn't happen again. That's all I want to say about releases. For the next one, 1.23, I think we will still have a 1.23, as in we're not going to go to 2.0 yet, but 1.23's main thing will be dynamic USB and the ability to configure USB on RP2 and other ports to do HID and MIDI or mass storage and CDC already. But Angus has done a lot of work on this, and that's ready to go in, and that will be the main headline of the next release, among other bits and pieces as usual. So that's all I have to say. I'm happy to take some questions. Hopefully you can still hear me.
You're coming through loud and clear now. It's fine.
Stop recording. My menu is gone. Am I still sharing screen?
No.
Oh, then that's sad, isn't it? Let me just show you what I was supposed to be having on my screen. This one here. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay.
Quick question on the RP2 USB thing. Is that just using the RP2's USB ports, or does it big bang on the other like generic kind of crossbar ports?
It just uses the built-in USB connector. It does not bit bang on anything else.
Okay.
Although potentially, I guess we could support that, but that's a whole bunch of that's different work. Yeah, because it'll act. It's not, again, maybe I should clarify. It's not USB host. It's just USB device, which means you could be a mouse or a keyboard or a MIDI or a mass storage or whatever you like, audio, webcam, anything, any USB device you can think of, or your own custom one. The idea is you can write the USB device in Python, the logic for it. So it's not USB host, and it's not on arbitrary pins. But if there was support for arbitrary pins, I guess other people have already written that with the PIOs. I'm pretty sure I've seen that. Do you know of it working?
I haven't looked. I will have a look. I'm curious now, but
I'm pretty sure it's been done. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you're talking